At 3:00 a.m., I woke up and found my son-in-law inside my house, searching through my files and taking something important. In the early morning, I called my daughter, hoping she would believe me. She calmly replied, "He was home all night. He would never do something like that." I hung up, feeling betrayed. But by noon, I received a call from the police. I thought it was about the break-in, until they said something that made me realize this was never just a family matter. I am grateful you chose to spend your time here. Tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from, your city, your state, your country? Every comment finds me. This is Revenge Dad, and we are just getting started. Note some elements of this story are fictional, included for narrative and educational purposes. Names and locations are coincidental. The lesson, however, is entirely your own to keep. My name is Thomas Walker, and I am 65 years old. I spent 40 years as a structural engineer, which means I spent 40 years learning one thing above everything else. The most important part of any building is the part nobody ever sees. I built this house myself, not with my own two hands entirely. I hired a crew, bought the permits, argued with the county inspector twice about the foundation depth. But I drew every line on the blueprint. I chose the grade of concrete for the footings. I stood in the dirt on a Tuesday morning in April of 1989 and marked the corners with stakes and string, the way my father taught me to mark anything worth building. You measure twice before you cut. You get the foundation right before you put up a single wall. Margaret picked the kitchen window. That was her one condition when I showed her the plan spread across the dining room table of our apartment in Arcadia. She ran her finger along the rear elevation and said, "Thomas, I want a window here, big enough to see the yard." I moved a load-bearing calculation 3 inches to the left to give her that window. It looked out onto a patch of dirt that she turned into a garden over the next 2 summers, planting a white flowering tree that she chose from a nursery in Monrovia, because she said it would bloom even in November when everything else had given up. It is November now, and the tree is blooming. Margaret has been gone 3 years. Pancreatic cancer, which is the kind of diagnosis that does not negotiate. She was 61 years old, and she handled it the way she handled most hard things. She cried once in the car outside the oncologist's office in Pasadena, and then she squared her shoulders and started making lists. She made a list of things she wanted to finish. She made a list of things she wanted me to remember. She made a list of groceries written on the back of a pharmacy receipt, tucked inside the small wooden box she kept on the bedroom dresser. I have not thrown that list away. The house is quiet in the way that a house with one person in it is always quiet. Not peaceful quiet, accounting quiet. The kind of quiet where you notice every sound because there are so few of them. On Fridays, I drive to the Pasadena Public Library and play chess with Robert Hayes at the table in the northwest corner near the periodicals. Robert is 68 years old and spent 31 years as a forensic accountant with the FBI's Los Angeles field office before he retired. He is the driest man I have ever known, and also the most reliably honest, which are qualities that tend to travel together in my experience. We have been playing chess every Friday for 15 years. He has never once let me win out of kindness, which is the only reason I trust his friendship completely. Emily calls on Sunday afternoons. She is 37 years old and works as an interior designer with a small studio in Silver Lake. She got her mother's eye for space and proportion. I am proud of her in the specific way that parents of only children are proud completely and sometimes almost painfully. She married Daniel Reed 4 years ago in Altadena on a Saturday afternoon in September. I shook Daniel's hand at the reception and thought, what I always think when I shake a man's hand for the first time, this tells you something. Daniel's grip was firm and practiced the handshake of a man who had learned that it makes an impression, not the grip of someone who has spent years doing physical work. But it was a good handshake. I told myself, it was a good handshake. Daniel is 41 and works as the chief financial officer of Meridian Construction Group, a mid-sized commercial construction company in the downtown Los Angeles. He remembered my birthday 2 years running and always refilled my coffee before I asked at Sunday dinners. I liked him. I helped them when they needed it, student loans in the early years, a short-term loan when a tax bill came in, heavy the down payment gap on their Silver Lake condo that I told Emily was a gift. 2 years ago, when Margaret was in her final months, I gave Daniel the combination to the safe in my study. I needed someone who could get into the house in an emergency. I wrote the 4 digits on a piece of paper and handed it to him in the kitchen. He folded it and put it in his shirt pocket. I did not think about it again. That is the thing about trust. You extend it and stop thinking about it, which is exactly when it becomes a liability. Last spring, Robert suggested I register for a property monitoring service. He mentioned it one Friday over the chessboard with the offhandedness he uses when he is actually serious. Thomas, he said, not looking up from the board, any transaction filed against your address gets flagged to your phone within the hour, $12 a month. It has saved more people than I can count from finding out too late. I signed up that evening. I am a structural engineer. I understand the value of early warning systems. The last weekend of October, Emily and Daniel came for dinner. Daniel was attentive, complimentary, easy to be around. But 3 times during the evening, he steered conversation toward my finances. Not bluntly, Daniel was never blunt. He asked about refinancing. He asked about my estate documents. He asked almost as an afterthought, while helping clear the plates, whether my important papers were organized somewhere accessible. It was the 3rd time he had asked variations of these questions in as many weeks. I answered vaguely and changed the subject each time. I spent 4 decades identifying structural weaknesses for a living. I know what it looks like when someone is testing load-bearing walls. That night, I lay in bed on my side of the mattress. I have not slept on Margaret's side in 3 years, and I looked at the ceiling for a long time. The house settled around me, its familiar vocabulary of sounds, the creak of the hallway floor outside the bedroom, the hum of the refrigerator, the way the window frame in the study taps twice when the Santa Ana winds come from the northeast. I have lived in this house long enough to know every sound it makes. I closed my eyes at last, and 3 hours later, one of those sounds woke me. This one did not belong. It was not the wind. I have lived in this house for 35 years. I know the wind. I know the way it comes off the San Gabriel Mountains in October and moves through the eaves above the 2nd floor bedroom with a sound like someone dragging furniture across carpet in the room above. I know the way the kitchen window frame taps twice when the pressure changes. I know the creak of the 3rd stair from the bottom, which has been creaking since 1994, and which I have never fixed because Margaret said it was useful that a house should make noise so you know it is alive. What I heard at 3 in the morning was not any of those sounds. It was a drawer. The particular scrape of wood on wood that happens when someone opens the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet too fast and does not lift the front edge to clear the runner. I have opened that drawer 10,000 times. I know exactly what it sounds like. I was out of bed before I finished processing what I had heard. Not running. An engineer does not run toward an unknown load. I moved to the bedroom door and stood there in the dark with my hand flat against the wood, and I breathed slowly and I listened. Footsteps on the hardwood floor of the study below me. Not heavy, careful. The particular rhythm of someone trying to be quiet and not entirely succeeding, because the floor in my study has a soft spot near the east wall that compresses slightly under weight, and whoever was down there had found it twice. A thin bar of light moved under the gap of my bedroom door. Flashlight. Moving left to right, the direction of the filing cabinet toward the safe. I opened the bedroom door without touching the hinges which I had oiled in September, because a well-maintained house does not announce you when you do not want to be announced. I stepped into the hall and stood at the top of the staircase and looked down. The study door was open 6 inches. Through that gap, I could see the beam of a small flashlight sweeping the wall above the safe, and I could see a man's shoulder and then his profile when he turned to check the room behind him. My chest did not seize, my hands did not shake. What happened instead was something quieter, and in some ways worse, a kind of absolute stillness that moved through me from the sternum outward the way cold water moves when you step into it. Because I recognized the profile. I recognized the set of the jaw, the particular way he held his left shoulder slightly higher than his right. A habit I had noticed at a dozen Sunday dinners and never thought to name until this moment when naming it meant something entirely different. It was Daniel. My son-in-law was standing in my study at 3 in the morning with a flashlight, and he was kneeling in front of my safe, and his right hand was already on the dial. He turned the combination without hesitating. 4 digits. He had them memorized. Of course he did. I had written them on a piece of paper and handed them to him in this kitchen 2 years ago, in a moment of ordinary trust that I now understood had been the beginning of something I was only now seeing the shape of. The safe opened. I heard the soft click of the bolts releasing the small protest of the hinges. Daniel set the flashlight on the floor angled upward and reached inside with both hands. He pulled out the brown envelope, first the one I kept in the back left corner, thick with $40,000 in cash that I had been setting aside for the past 2 years in preparation for replacing the roof, and the second floor subfloor, both of which needed work. He turned the envelope in his hands, once feeling the weight of it, and then he placed it on the floor beside him with the focused efficiency of a man moving through a checklist he had rehearsed. My throat tightened, not from fear, from recognition. That was the motion of a man who had done this in his head many times before tonight. Then he reached back into the safe, and his hands found the wooden box. Margaret's box. Walnut 4 inches by 6 with a small brass latch she had polished twice a year. She bought it from an antique dealer in Old Town Pasadena the summer before we were married, and she used it to keep what she called her important papers. Not financial documents, not legal records, just the things that mattered to her, in the particular way that certain objects matter. Inside it now was the life insurance policy I had not yet finished filing, a $450,000 policy, with me listed as the sole beneficiary, the final claim, paperwork still pending, because the hospital records department had been backed up for months and I had not pushed hard enough. And underneath the policy, her handwriting on a pharmacy receipt, a grocery list, milk bread, the specific brand of ginger tea she drank in the evenings. Daniel turned the box over in his hands, testing the latch with his thumb. He did not open it. He set it on top of the envelope. I stood at the top of my staircase, and I did not move, and I did not make a sound. I want to tell you what I was thinking in that moment, because people who hear a story like this always imagine the same thing that you would feel, rage the clean, hot certainty of it that you would want to move and confront and demand. And there was something like rage in me, but it was buried under something colder and more useful. I was thinking about load distribution. I was thinking about what happens when you identify a structural failure in a building that is currently occupied. You do not start demolition. You shore up the surrounding structure first. You document what you are seeing. You make sure that when the moment comes to act, you have everything you need. If Daniel knew I had seen him, he would be in his car with my $40,000 and Margaret's box before I reached the bottom of the stairs. And by morning, every piece of paper he had come here to retrieve would be gone, and I would have nothing but my word against his and a safe that happened to be empty. So, I stood there. I breathed. I memorized. He collected the envelope and the box and tucked them under his left arm. He swept the flashlight beam across the room one more time, satisfying himself, and then he moved toward the door. I stepped back into the shadow of the hallway, pressing myself flat against the wall, and I watched him pass below me in the dark, moving quickly now through the kitchen toward the garage door. The garage door opened. A breath of cold air reached the top of the stairs. The engine of his car, that particular German sedan he had bought 2 years ago, and mentioned the price of, more than once turned over in the driveway. The sound moved away from me, down the street, growing quieter the way sound does at 3 in the morning, when there is nothing else to compete with. It fading until there was nothing left but the settling of the house around me, and the distant bark of a neighbor's dog, and the silence that follows a theft. I stood in the dark at the top of my staircase for a long time. Then I walked downstairs into my study, and I turned on the desk lamp. The safe door was still open. I looked at the empty interior for the length of time it took me to understand everything that had changed in the last 10 minutes. Then I sat down at my desk, pulled open the top drawer, and took out the composition notebook I have used for field notes since 1987. I wrote the date. I wrote the time, 3:17 in the morning. I wrote down everything I had seen in the order I had seen it. The drawer, the flashlight, the profile, the combination he knew by heart, the envelope, the box, the way he had handled both with the practiced calm of a man following a plan. I wrote it all down because I am an engineer, and engineers document what they observe before they do anything else. The record matters. The record is the only thing that does not change its story, depending on who is in the room. When I finished, I capped the pen and set the notebook on the desk and looked at the empty safe and thought about my wife's wooden box riding in the back seat of that car through the empty streets of Pasadena at 3 in the morning, and I felt something then that I had not felt since the day the oncologist said the word pancreatic in that quiet office in the medical building on Lake Avenue. I felt the specific grief of losing something you cannot get back. But underneath it, steady as a foundation that has passed every inspection for 35 years, was something else. I was not done yet. I did not sleep after Daniel left. I sat at my desk until the sky outside the study window went from black to the particular deep blue that precedes a California dawn, and then I made coffee and I sat at the kitchen table and I watched the white flowering tree in the yard come into color as the light grew. Margaret had chosen it because it bloomed past its season, past the point when everything else had given up. She called that stubbornness a virtue. I had never appreciated it more than I did at 6 in the morning on a Saturday in late October, sitting alone in my kitchen with $40,000 missing from my safe and my dead wife's wooden box riding somewhere across Los Angeles in the back seat of my son-in-law's car. At 7:30, I called Emily. She picked up on the second ring, which meant she was already awake. "Dad," she said, warm and easy, the tone she uses when the call is expected. "What's up?" "Morning, sweetheart." I kept my voice exactly where I wanted it. Level unhurried, the voice I use when I am reviewing a structural report, and I have already found the error, but I want to see how far the other person gets before they find it themselves. "How are you doing? How's work?" We talked for 4 minutes about a project she was finishing in Los Feliz, a kitchen renovation for a couple who kept changing their minds about the tile. She laughed twice. I laughed once. It was a completely ordinary Saturday morning phone call between a father and his daughter, and every second of it felt like standing on a floor I now knew had been compromised below the surface. Then I said, as lightly as I have ever said anything in my life, "Hey, did Daniel happen to go out at all last night? I thought I saw a car that looked like his on the street around midnight." "Probably nothing." The pause lasted 3 seconds. I counted them. An engineer measures everything. "No," Emily said. The warmth in her voice did not disappear exactly, but it changed, thinned out the way a wall sounds different when you tap it and find there is nothing behind it. "He was home all night, Dad. We watched a movie and went to bed early." Another half second. "Why is something wrong?" "Not at all," I said. "Must have been someone else's car. Give my love to Daniel." "I will," she said. "Love you, Dad." "Love you too, Em." I set the phone down on the kitchen table, and I looked at it for a moment, and then I looked up at the photograph on the wall beside the back door. Emily on her graduation day at USC, 22 years old, squinting into the sun with her diploma in one hand, and her mortarboard tilted sideways, because she had never been able to keep a hat straight on her head. She had Margaret's cheekbones and my stubborn jaw, and she was in that photograph the most purely happy I had ever seen another human being. I had raised her to tell the truth. I had tried to model it for 40 years, and she had just lied to me in the particular careful way that people lie when they have practiced the lie in advance, when they know the question is coming, and they have decided on the answer before the phone even rings. She was afraid. I understood that. Fear makes people into shapes they would not otherwise choose, but understanding it did not make the sound of her voice any easier to carry. I needed Robert. I was still sitting at that table at 12:13 when my phone rang again. Not Emily, a number I did not recognize. A 6th and 26 area code, Pasadena. I picked up. "Mr. Walker," a man's voice, flat professional. "This is Officer Delaney with the Pasadena Police Department. We have received a report regarding some property documents filed against your address on Waverly Drive. I wonder if you have a few minutes to answer some questions." I set down my coffee cup very carefully. "What kind of documents?" I said. "A deed of trust, sir, filed 4 days ago. The name on the borrower line matches your address, but our records show no corresponding loan application through standard channels." A pause. "Are you aware of any recent refinancing activity on your property?" I was not aware of any refinancing activity on my property. I had not signed any deed of trust. I had not spoken to any lender. I had not authorized anyone to act on my behalf in any financial transaction involving my home. I said none of those things out loud. "Officer Delaney." I said, "I appreciate the call. I am going to need to speak with an attorney before I discuss this further. Can I have a number to reach you?" He gave me a number. I wrote it in the composition notebook below everything else I had written that morning. Then I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, looking at the number, understanding that what had started as a family problem had just introduced itself as something considerably larger. I needed Robert, more than I had needed him an hour ago. I needed him right now. I gave myself the weekend, not because I needed time to decide what to do. I had decided that by the time the coffee finished brewing on Saturday morning. I gave myself the weekend because 40 years of engineering taught me that the impulse to act immediately after discovering a structural failure is almost always the wrong impulse. You stop. You assess. You make sure you understand the full scope of what you are looking at before you touch anything. A wall that looks load-bearing sometimes is not. A crack that looks catastrophic is sometimes cosmetic. And sometimes what looks like a simple failure is the visible symptom of something that has been wrong in the foundation for a very long time. I spent Saturday and Sunday doing what I do when I need to think without thinking. I worked with my hands. I replaced 3 sections of weathered fascia board along the roofline above the garage. I re-caulked the kitchen window frame, the one Margaret had chosen, which had developed a hairline gap along the bottom sill that would let moisture in over winter if I left it. I moved slowly and deliberately, and I let the work absorb the part of my mind that wanted to run ahead of itself. On Sunday afternoon, Emily called at her regular time. We talked for 20 minutes about nothing consequential. She sounded normal. She sounded so normal that it was its own kind of information. Monday morning, I drove to the Pasadena Public Library. Robert Hayes was already at our table in the northwest corner, near the periodicals, which did not surprise me because Robert is always at the table before I am. He had the Wall Street Journal open to the markets section and a large coffee from the cart outside in a paper cup beside his elbow. He was wearing the gray cardigan he wore every Monday because he had 4 identical gray cardigans and rotated them through the week, a system he had explained to me once with complete seriousness as an exercise in eliminating unnecessary decisions. He looked up when I came through the door. I had not called ahead, and I was 2 hours earlier than our usual time. He folded the newspaper. "Sit down," he said, "and tell me what happened." That is the thing about a 15-year friendship with a man who spent 3 decades reading financial crime for the federal government. He does not waste time on preamble. I sat down across from him and I told him everything. I told it in the order. It happened the way I write field notes chronologically without editorializing just the facts and the sequence and the specific details I had observed. The drawer sound at 3 in the morning, the flashlight beam, Daniel's profile in the gap of the door, the combination he knew by heart, the envelope, the box, the way he had handled both with the calm of a man running a checklist he had built in advance. Emily's pause on the phone, the 3 seconds I had counted, the way her voice had thinned. Robert listened without moving. He had his hands flat on the table in front of him and his eyes on my face, and he did not nod or react or offer anything until I stopped talking. Then he picked up his coffee, took a long sip, and set it back down. "You want my analysis?" he said, "or you want me to tell you what I actually think? Tell me what you actually think." "Your son-in-law is not a thief," Robert said. "A thief takes what he can carry and leaves. What you're describing is a man who came to your house at 3 in the morning with a specific list. He knew the combination, he knew where the safe was, he knew what he was looking for." He paused. "That is not opportunism, Thomas. That is damage control. The question is what damage he is trying to control." I told him about the documents Daniel had asked me to hold 18 months ago. A manila envelope business paperwork. He said he needed stored somewhere secure while his office was being renovated. I had put it in the filing cabinet without looking inside because Daniel had asked me not to, and because I had trusted him, and because I had been in the middle of managing Margaret's final months, and I had not had the capacity to be suspicious of everything. Robert set his coffee down with a precision that I recognized. It was the same precision he used when moving a chess piece he had been planning for several moves. "Where is that envelope now?" he asked. "Filing cabinet, bottom drawer. I photographed every page the week after he gave it to me. I had done it the way I do everything quietly without announcement, because a structural engineer never has only one copy of a critical document. He didn't find it because I moved the original to a different location 3 months ago when he started asking about my finances." For the first time in the conversation, something shifted in Robert's expression. Not surprise exactly, more like the particular satisfaction of a man who has just had a hypothesis confirmed. "You moved it," he said. "I moved it." Without telling him. Without telling anyone. Robert looked at me across the chessboard between us. Neither of us had set up pieces, and it occurred to me that this was the first Monday in 15 years we had sat at this table without playing. "Thomas," he said, "do you have the photographs with you?" I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket and put a folded envelope on the table between us. Inside were 37 printed pages, every document from that manila envelope photographed on my phone and printed at the copy shop on Colorado Boulevard the week after Daniel handed them to me. Robert opened the envelope. He looked at the first page for a moment, then the second, then the third. He did not speak. He reached into the bag at his feet and pulled out his laptop and opened it on the table and began typing with the focused efficiency of a man who has run financial investigations for the federal government and knows exactly what he is looking for. I went to the library cart and got 2 coffees. I came back and set one beside his elbow and sat down and waited. The periodicals room was quiet around us. The particular Monday morning quiet of a public library, the soft sounds of pages turning, the distant beep of the checkout scanner, a child somewhere in the children's section asking a question I could not quite hear. 17 minutes passed. I know because I watched the clock above the reference desk. Then Robert stopped typing. He looked up from the screen, and he said with the careful flatness he uses when he wants to make sure you hear exactly what he is saying and nothing more and nothing less. Thomas, these documents are not business paperwork. The clock above the reference desk clicked to the next minute. Tell me, I said. I will, Robert said. But first I need you to understand something. What you brought me today is not a family problem. He turned the laptop so I could see the screen columns of figures, company names, transaction dates. This is a federal problem, and it has been one for a lot longer than last Friday night. We drove to my house in separate cars, which is how Robert and I have always done things. We are both men of a certain age who value the ability to leave when we need to leave without explanation or coordination. He pulled into the driveway behind me and was out of his car before I had finished locking my laptop bag over his shoulder, coffee cup still in hand, even though it had to be cold by now. Kitchen table or study? He asked, coming up the front walk. Study, I said. Better light. I unlocked the front door and we went inside, and I did not look at the safe when we passed it, which took a deliberate effort that I noted and filed away. I made a fresh pot of coffee. Robert set up his laptop on the corner of my desk and pushed the chair aside and stood, which is how he prefers to work. When he is thinking, he told me once that sitting slows down the part of his brain he needs most. I spread the 37 printed pages across the desk in the order I had photographed them, and set the original manila envelope, now empty, on the corner as a reference point. Robert picked up the first page. He held it at arm's length, the way people do when their eyes have started to betray them, and pride prevents them from reaching for their glasses. Then he set it down and put his glasses on and picked it up again. Walk me through how he gave these to you, he said, not looking up. 18 months ago, a Tuesday evening, he came by after work, said his office was being renovated and he needed somewhere to store some business documents temporarily. Said he'd collect them in a few weeks. I poured 2 cups of coffee and put one near his elbow. He never came back for them. Did he ask you not to read them? He said they were confidential, internal company materials. Robert made a sound that was not quite a word. He set the first page down and picked up the second, then the third, moving through them, with the rapid efficiency of a man reading a language he has spoken for 30 years. After the first dozen pages, he stopped and went back to the laptop and typed for a while without speaking. I sat in the armchair by the window and drank my coffee and looked out at the yard. The white tree was catching the morning light at an angle that made the late-season blossoms look almost luminous, the way Margaret always said they looked in November. She had been right about that tree in every way. She was right about most things she chose carefully. I thought about how I had first met Robert Hayes. It was the spring of 2009 at a commercial construction site in northwest Pasadena, where I had been called in as a structural consultant on a project that had stalled under investigation. The general contractor was suspected of running a subcontractor fraud scheme, billing the client for specialty labor that was never performed, pocketing the difference. Robert was the FBI forensic accountant assigned to the case, a lean man in a good suit, who had shown up at the site trailer one morning and asked to see the structural drawings as part of his financial audit because he wanted to understand what the legitimate work actually looked like so he could identify what had been fabricated. We had spent 4 hours at a folding table in that trailer, me explaining load calculations and foundation specs, while Robert cross-referenced them against billing records looking for the gap between what was built and what was charged. I had found it useful working alongside him. He asked precise questions and he listened to precise answers, and he did not fill silence with noise, which is rarer than it should be. We had gotten lunch from a food truck parked outside the site, carnitas tacos, both of us standing at a high top table in the November sun, and somewhere between the structural analysis and the second cup of horchata. He had mentioned that he played chess. I had mentioned the same. The following Friday we had played at the library and we had not missed a week since. I had never once imagined sitting across from him in my own study 16 years later, watching him read documents that implicated my son-in-law in a federal crime. Okay, Robert said. He straightened up and turned from the laptop and looked at the papers spread across the desk with the expression of a man taking inventory. Here is what I can tell you from what I'm looking at, setting aside for the moment what I can't verify without access to Meridian's actual records. He picked up 3 pages and laid them side by side on the desk. And these are invoices, he said. Billing documents from 3 different subcontracting companies to Meridian Construction Group. Company 1 is called Pacific Edge Site Services. Company 2 is Western Slope Grading and Excavation. Company 3 is Cal South Foundation Specialists. He tapped each page in turn. All 3 claimed to have performed work on Meridian projects in the last 2 years. All 3 invoice for specialized labor earthwork grading foundation prep, the kind of work that is hard to verify after the fact, because it happens underground and early in the construction sequence before most of the site documentation is in place. How much? I asked. These 3 documents alone represent $412,000 in billed services. He paused to let that land. But here is the problem. I ran all 3 company names through the California Secretary of State Business database while we were at the library. Pacific Edge Site Services dissolved in 2021. Western Slope Grading and Excavation has no active registration in California. Cal South Foundation Specialists exists on paper, but its registered address is a UPS store on Foothill Boulevard in Rancho Cucamonga, and it has filed no tax returns since its registration date. The room was quiet for a moment. Outside, a car passed on the street. A sprinkler system in the neighbor's yard kicked on with its usual hiccup and hiss. Shell companies, I said. Ghost companies, Robert corrected. Shells imply some operational structure. These have none. They exist only to receive money. He picked up another page. And here is what tells me this is not a recent improvisation. The invoices span a period of 4 years, Thomas. The earliest one in this set is dated 43 months ago. The billing amounts increase incrementally small numbers, at first then larger ones as the methodology is refined. That is not panic. That is a system. I looked at the pages on the desk. 43 months. Daniel and Emily had been married 4 years. He started before they were married, I said. Possibly shortly after, Robert said. Or possibly the documents you have don't go back far enough to show the actual beginning. He closed 2 of the invoices and set them aside. What I can tell you with confidence is that whoever put this together understood construction billing cycles, understood which categories of work are hardest to audit, and understood how to create paper trails that look legitimate at first glance. He looked at me over his glasses. This was not done by someone guessing. This was done by someone with specific knowledge of how construction companies process payments. He's been CFO of Meridian for 6 years, I said. Yes, Robert said. He has. He went back to the laptop and typed for another few minutes, running searches I could not see from where I was sitting, his fingers moving with the confident speed of someone who knows exactly which databases to check and in what order. I refilled both our cups and set his beside the laptop without interrupting him. Then he stopped. He leaned forward slightly, his face 3 inches closer to the screen than it had been before. Thomas, he said. Something in the way he said my name flat, careful the tone he uses when he is about to tell me something he would rather not have found, made me set down my coffee cup and stand up and cross to the desk. I looked at the screen. It was a California Secretary of State Business registration record. Standard format entity name, at the top, registration date, registered agent principal address. The entity name at the top of the record read Thomas Walker, Construction Consulting LLC. The principal address was my home address on Waverly Drive in Pasadena. The registered agent was listed as Thomas Walker. The registration date was 14 months ago. I had never heard of this company in my life. There is a specific kind of shock that does not announce itself with noise. I have seen it on job sites the moment a worker realizes that the thing they are looking at is not what they thought it was, that the load they believed was supported, is not that the structure they were confident in has been wrong all along, in a way that changes everything that came before and everything that will come after. The face goes still. The hands stop moving. And there is a second, sometimes 2, sometimes 5, where the brain simply refuses to accept what the eyes are reporting because the implications are too large to process all at once. That is what happened to me when I read the name on Robert's screen. Thomas Walker, Construction Consulting LLC. My name, my address, My supposed signature on a registrations document I had never seen authorizing a company I had never formed to conduct business I had never agreed to conduct. My hands, I noticed, had gripped the edge of the desk. Not clenched, just anchored the way you put your hand on a wall when the room tilts. I made myself release the wood and step back and breathe through my nose the way I learned to breathe on difficult job sites, slowly, and from the diaphragm, because panic is a luxury that structural engineers cannot afford when something has gone wrong in a building. "Talk to me," I said to Robert. "All of it." Robert pulled a chair from the corner of the room and sat down for the first time since we had arrived, which told me he understood that what came next required stillness. The LLC was registered 14 months ago through the California Secretary of State's online portal, he said. The registration system allows filings to be submitted electronically with a digital signature attestation, meaning the person filing clicks a box confirming that the registered agent has consented to serve. There is no independent verification of that consent at the time of filing. The signature on the registration document itself, he turned the laptop to show me a scanned image he had pulled up, appears to resemble yours. It is not yours. The pen pressure is wrong, and the terminal stroke of the K in Walker breaks differently than the way you write it. But at a glance to someone who has not studied your handwriting, it is close enough. I looked at the signature on the screen. Someone had studied my name enough to approximate it. Someone who had seen me sign documents. Someone who had been in my house at Thanksgiving and Christmas and Sunday dinners for 4 years and had paid attention to things I had never thought to guard. "How many contracts?" I asked. Robert switched to another tab. 11, all between Thomas Walker Construction Consulting LLC and Meridian Construction Group, spanning 14 months. The work described in each contract is consulting and oversight services for foundation and structural elements on various Meridian projects. He looked at me over his glasses. "Your specialty. Specifically, your specialty." He knew what I did for 40 years. He knew exactly what you did for 40 years. He built the fraud around your professional history, Thomas. Your credentials, your area of expertise, your reputation in the industry. That is not coincidence. That is architecture. The word landed somewhere in my chest and stayed there. Architecture. A man had taken the 40 years I spent building a name and a reputation and a body of honest work, and he had used them as raw materials for something I would be sick to touch. He had used me the way a counterfeiter uses real currency, not to complement it, but to make the fake version harder to distinguish. "Total value of the 11 contracts?" I asked. $342,000, Robert said. "All paid. All transferred to a bank account held in the name of Thomas Walker Construction Consulting LLC at a branch of a regional bank in Glendale. The account was opened with a California driver's license and a copy of the LLC registration document." He paused. "The driver's license, I would assume, was not yours either." I crossed to the window and stood with my back to the room for a moment, looking out at the street. A woman was walking a golden retriever past my front yard, the dog pulling enthusiastically toward the base of the liquid amber tree at the edge of my property the way dogs always did. An ordinary Monday morning on an ordinary residential street in Pasadena. 40 years of work. $342,000. My name on 11 contracts I had never read for work. I had never performed on projects I had never visited. "What are we talking about legally?" I said, turning back. Robert folded his hands on the desk with the deliberate composure of a man who has delivered bad news in formal settings many times and knows how to do it without softening it into something unrecognizable. "Identity theft under California Penal Code, Section 535, he said. "That is a felony in this state, carrying up to 3 years in state prison per count. But more significantly," he tapped the laptop screen, "every one of those 11 contracts was executed electronically, and every payment was transferred via electronic funds transfer. That means we are looking at wire fraud under Title 18 of the United States Code, Section 1343, federal jurisdiction. Each transaction is a separate count, with a maximum sentence of 20 years per count." He let that settle for a moment. 11 contracts, Thomas. If a federal prosecutor decided to charge each payment separately, we are talking about potential exposure that would end a man's life as he has known it. And the FBI has concurrent jurisdiction with LAPD on the wire fraud component. meaning both agencies can investigate simultaneously, and whichever builds the stronger case moves first. He looked at me steadily. I want to be honest with you about something. What I can see from these documents suggests a significant deliberate multi-year fraud scheme. But the documents you have are partial. They are what Daniel chose to give you to hold, which means they just probably not the most incriminating materials in existence. The full picture is inside Meridian's financial systems, and we do not have access to those. Someone at Meridian does, I said. Someone at Meridian does, Robert agreed. And that person, if they have any sense at all, is currently very aware that the internal audit the board of directors ordered last month is going to find things that cannot be explained away. He stood and closed the laptop. We need to be ready to move before Daniel understands that the clock has run out, because when he does, he will not sit still. I looked at the printed pages spread across my desk. 37 pages of documents that a man had handed to me in my own kitchen and asked me to keep safe, never understanding that the safest place for evidence is in the hands of the person it was meant to destroy. He picked the wrong house, I said. Robert put his laptop in his bag and looked at me with the particular expression he wears when he has won a chess match but does not consider it appropriate to smile about it. Yes, he said. He did. That evening after Robert had gone home and the house had settled into its quiet and I had eaten dinner alone at the kitchen table, with the radio on my phone buzzed on the counter with an incoming text message from a number I did not recognize. I picked it up and read it. Mr. Walker, my name is Carol Norris. I am the controller at Meridian Construction Group. I need to speak with you and if possible with someone you trust, not by phone. I have been holding something for 3 months and I do not know how much longer I can. I read it twice. Then I set the phone face down on the counter and stood very still in my kitchen for a moment, looking at the window above the sink. The one Margaret had chosen, the one that looked out onto the yard where her white tree was now dark against the night sky. Sometimes the evidence finds you. Before I tell you who reached out to us from inside Meridian and what she had been hiding for 8 months, I need to know if you are still with me. Drop the number 7 in the comments right now. That is all. Just 7. It tells me you are here, and it means more than you know. And a quick note before we continue the story ahead, contains some fictional elements woven in for narrative purposes. Parts of it may not reflect events exactly as they occurred in life. If that is not the kind of story you came for, this is a good moment to step away. No hard feelings. For everyone's still here, let's keep going. Robert called me Tuesday morning to say he had verified Carol Norris. He had spent Monday evening running her name through the databases he still had informal access to, through former colleagues, the kind of access that does not officially exist after retirement, but that nobody in federal law enforcement ever entirely gives up. Carol Ann Norris, 51 years old, licensed CPA in the state of California, employed as controller at Meridian Construction Group for 11 years. Clean record, no litigation history. 2 daughters, both currently enrolled in California state universities. A mortgage on a house in Monterey Park that she had been paying down steadily for 9 years. She is exactly who she says she is, Robert told me. And she is scared. The way she wrote that message, I have been holding something for 3 months. That is not someone who wants attention. That is someone who has been calculating risk for a long time and has finally decided that staying quiet is the more dangerous option. We agreed to meet her Wednesday morning. Robert chose the location, a small Korean-owned coffee shop on West 8th Street in the Koreatown neighborhood of Los Angeles, the kind of place that opens at 6 in the morning for the early shift workers and does not attract the kind of clientele that pays attention to other people's conversations. He had used it before, he said without elaborating on the circumstances, and I did not ask. We arrived 11 minutes early. Carol Norris was already there. She was sitting at table 4 in the far corner, her back to the wall, and her face to the door, which told me something about how she had been living for the past 3 months. She was a trim woman with dark hair cut short and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, wearing a blazer over a collared shirt that suggested she had come from or was going to an office, though it was not yet 8 in the morning. In front of her was a cup of coffee she had not touched. Her hands were flat on the table, fingers spread slightly, and she was doing the controlled breathing of someone managing something she did not want to be visible on her face. She watched us cross the room without moving. "Mr. Hayes," she said when we reached the table. Her voice was steady. I respected that. "Ms. Norris." Robert pulled out the chair across from her and sat. I took the chair to his left. "This is Thomas Walker." She looked at me directly. "I know who you are," she said. "I've known your name for 3 months. I just didn't know which version of you was real." "There is only one version," I said. Something shifted in her expression, not quite relief, but a loosening of something that had been held very tight. "Then we have a problem with the same person," she said. Robert leaned forward slightly, his forearms on the table, the posture he uses when he wants someone to understand they have his complete attention. "Ms. Norris, before you tell us anything, I want to make sure you understand your position here. You are a potential witness in what may become a federal investigation. Anything you share with us today could be relevant to that investigation. Have you spoken with an attorney?" "I retained one last week," she said. "She advised me to make this contact. She also helped me understand." She paused, choosing her words with the precision of someone who had rehearsed this conversation many times alone, "that the recordings I made are legal." Robert's expression did not change, but I saw his right hand move slightly on the table. "Tell me about the recordings." Carol wrapped both hands around her coffee cup, finally, as if she needed something to hold. 11 months ago, I started to understand that something was wrong with certain vendor accounts, specifically the subcontractor billings in the foundation and structural category. The numbers didn't match the project timelines. I brought it to Daniel Reed in September of last year. He explained it away, said there had been a renegotiation of payment terms, said the documentation was being updated, said it was an administrative issue he was handling. She looked down at her coffee. "He was very convincing. He always is." "But you weren't convinced," Robert said. "I was convinced enough to be quiet," she said, and there was something in her voice when she said it, a particular flatness that told me she had not forgiven herself for those months of silence. "I have 2 daughters. One is a junior at Cal Poly. The other starts at UC Davis in the fall. I needed my job." She looked up. "I'm not proud of that calculation, but I made it." "What changed?" I asked. "He started to get specific," she said. "About Thomas Walker Construction Consulting. He started mentioning the name in internal conversations, always casually, always as if it were established background information. Thomas Walker's team handled that. Run it through the Walker Consulting line. And then in February during a budget review meeting, he said," she stopped and pressed her lips together briefly. "He said that if anyone from the board asked about the structural consulting line items to refer them to the Walker account documentation, because, and I am quoting him exactly, Walker has been doing business this way for years. It's just how he structures his fees." The coffee shop was warm around us. Somewhere near the counter, a machine steamed milk with a sound like a distant pressure release. "I knew then," Carol said, "that he was building something that was going to fall on someone else. And I knew whose name was on the outside of it." She looked at me again. "Yours." "When did you start recording?" Robert asked. 8 months ago, after the February meeting." She reached into the leather bag on the chair beside her and removed a small flash drive and set it on the table between us. It was an ordinary drive, the kind you buy in a 3-pack at any office supply store. "My attorney reviewed every recording before I came here. She confirmed that, because the conduct involved constitutes federal wire fraud, a federal crime, the recordings fall under federal evidentiary standards, which permit one-party consent. She also noted that California courts have accepted recordings made by a participant for the purpose of documenting ongoing criminal activity. Every conversation on that drive I was present for. I participated in them deliberately." She pushed the drive half an inch closer to Robert. 17 conversations, 8 months, the last one was 6 days ago. Robert looked at the drive on the table without touching it. "What's on the last one?" Carol's jaw tightened. "He told me that if the internal audit found irregularities in the subcontractor accounts, I should be prepared to say that the documentation had been submitted to me by Thomas Walker's office directly, and that I had processed it in good faith." She met my eyes across the table. "He wanted me to put your name on it, out loud, on the record." The room was quiet for a moment. A bus went past on West 8th Street, its engine loud and then gone. "Ms. Norris," I said, "why did you reach out to Robert specifically?" She almost smiled. It did not quite make it to her eyes. "I spent 3 months trying to figure out who I could trust. I went through every option I could think of, the board, the company's outside auditors, an anonymous tip line." She shook her head. "All of those go through channels that Daniel has had years to influence. I needed someone outside the system." She looked at Robert. I found a trade publication article from 2009 about a subcontractor fraud case in Pasadena that was resolved with FBI involvement. Your name was in it as the lead forensic accountant. I called the FBI's Los Angeles field office and asked if they had a forwarding contact for retired agents. They gave me a general inquiry number. I left a message. 3 weeks later, someone called me back with your cell. Robert nodded once slowly. 3 weeks is about right, he said, as if this explains something about the pace of institutional memory that I did not need to understand. He picked up the flash drive and turned it once in his fingers and set it in his shirt pocket. Oh, Ms. Norris. He said, I want you to go about your normal routine this week. Go to work, attend whatever meetings you would normally attend, and do not change your behavior in any way that Daniel Reed might notice. He looked at her steadily. Can you do that? She picked up her coffee cup and finally took a long drink of what had to be completely cold coffee, and she did not flinch at the temperature. I have been doing it for 8 months, she said. I can do it a little longer. We left the coffee shop separately at 5-minute intervals, the way Robert suggested. I walked to my car alone through the mid-morning streets of Koreatown, past the barber shops and the insurance offices and the Korean language signage that Margaret had always found beautiful on the occasions we had driven through the neighborhood together. I was almost to my car when my phone buzzed in my jacket pocket. A notification from Property Radar. I stopped walking and opened it on the sidewalk, standing still while the foot traffic moved around me, and I read what it said, and then I read it again. A second deed of trust had been recorded against my property on Waverly Drive in Pasadena. Amount $280,000. Lender a private lending entity registered in Nevada. Borrower Thomas Walker. Notarized signature on file. This was not the same document Officer Delaney had called about on Saturday. This was a new one filed 2 days ago, while I had been focused on everything else. I had not signed any such document. I had not been to any notary. I had not borrowed $280,000 against my house, the house I had built, the house with Margaret's window and Margaret's tree, and 35 years of a life that I had constructed one decision at a time, the way you build anything worth building, carefully, honestly, with the right materials and the right foundation. Someone had just tried to take it from me while I was sitting in a coffee shop in Koreatown, finding out about everything else they had already taken. I called Robert before I reached my car. He picked up on the first ring. I read him the Property Radar notification word for word, standing on the sidewalk outside the coffee shop. While the morning foot traffic moved around me, a woman pushing a stroller, 2 men in hard hats carrying coffee cups, a delivery driver loading a dolly from a panel truck. The ordinary machinery of a Wednesday morning in Los Angeles, entirely indifferent to what I was reading. Robert was quiet for 4 seconds after I finished. I have learned to read his silences the way I read load calculations, by what they contain, not by their absence. Where are you right now? He said. Koreatown, my car. Do not go home yet. Meet me at the LA County Recorder's office on Norwalk Boulevard. I know the building. Park in the structure on the east side. A pause. Thomas, do not call Emily, not yet. I understood why, without asking. Whatever Emily knew or did not know, a phone call from me right now would travel through her to Daniel before the day was out, and Daniel needed to believe that everything was still proceeding according to his plan. We met at the recorder's office 40 minutes later. Robert had called ahead to a contact he declined to name, and we were brought to a supervisor's desk rather than the public counter, which saved us an hour and a half of waiting. The deed of trust was in the system exactly as the notification had described, recorded 4 days ago, not 6 weeks as I had initially assumed. The notarization had been performed by a licensed notary in the Van Nuys area, whose commission number appeared on the document. The commission number is real, Robert said, studying the record on the supervisor's monitor. That notary exists, but I would be willing to bet a significant amount that she did not notarize this document, that someone used her commission number without her knowledge. It is a common method in deed fraud cases in Los Angeles County. The FBI's mortgage fraud unit has documented dozens of incidents in the last 3 years alone. He asked the supervisor about the process for filing an affidavit of forgery, which is the formal mechanism by which a property owner in California can challenge a fraudulent deed recorded against their title. The supervisor, a patient woman in her 50s who had clearly explained this process many times before, walked us through it. The affidavit would need to be notarized, filed with the recorder's office, and served on the lender. To stop any collection or foreclosure action while the challenge was pending, we would need a court order, specifically an emergency temporary restraining order, filed in Los Angeles Superior Court, which Robert said he would handle through a civil attorney he trusted. "How long does the emergency order take?" I asked. "If we file today, a judge can issue it by end of business tomorrow," the supervisor said, "assuming the filing is complete and the grounds are clear." She looked at Robert. "Are the grounds clear?" "The borrower was not present at the signing," Robert said. "The signature is forged. We have documentation establishing that the property owner has been the subject of a coordinated identity theft scheme currently under investigation. The grounds are exceptionally clear. We filed the affidavit of forgery before noon." Robert drove me back to my car in Koreatown afterward, and we sat for a few minutes in the parking structure while he made 2 phone calls, one to the civil attorney, one to a contact at the FBI's Los Angeles field office, whom he described only as someone who would want to know. I sat in the passenger seat and looked at the concrete wall of the parking structure and thought about the word coordinated, which Robert had used with the supervisor. Coordinated, not impulsive, not opportunistic. Everything Daniel had done, the ghost company's the LLC, in my name, the deed of trust. The documents he had asked me to hold had been coordinated. Pieces of a structure designed and assembled over years, each one supporting the others, each one calculated to redirect weight onto a foundation that bore my name. He had built something. I had to give him that. He had built something deliberate and load-bearing and almost invisible, and he had built it inside my life, using my trust as the primary material. I drove home alone. The house was the way I had left it, quiet, ordered, the particular stillness of a well-maintained home in the middle of a weekday. I hung my jacket on the hook by the front door, the hook that Margaret had installed herself one Saturday in 2003, with a level and a drill and more precision than the task strictly required, because she said, "If you were going to do something, you should do it right." I went to the kitchen and stood at the counter for a moment, looking at nothing. Then I walked down the hall to the study. The safe was where it had always been, set into the wall to the left of the bookcase behind the framed survey map of the property that we had hung there in 1991, because Margaret thought it was beautiful, a piece of functional document elevated to art by nothing more than a frame and a decision about what deserved to be looked at. I moved the map aside. I turned the combination 4 digits that I had given to a man who had used them to take what was not his. I pulled the door open. I was looking for the insurance renewal documents for the car, which I had been meaning to file for 2 weeks, and which I had told myself I would get to after things settled down. A small and ordinary task, the kind that accumulates during difficult periods. The renewal documents were in the right front corner where I kept them. I reached for them and my hand stopped. The left rear corner of the safe was empty. I had known it was gone since the night Daniel left. I had watched him carry it out through the garage door, had written it in the notebook that same night in the same handwriting I use for everything else. Box, walnut, brass, latch taken. But knowing a thing and standing in front of the space it used to occupy are not the same. I stood there with my hand still extended, fingers touching the edge of the renewal documents, and I looked at the empty corner where Margaret's wooden box had sat for 3 years, and for the first time since I had written it down, I let myself understand what that meant. I had watched him carry it out through the garage door and heard his car move away down the street. I had written it in the composition notebook that same night, in the same handwriting I used for everything else. Box, walnut, brass, latch taken. 10 days I had held that fact at arm's length. The way you hold a structural report you already know is going to tell you something you do not want to read. Standing here now in the afternoon light, with my hand still on the renewal documents and the safe door open in front of me, I could not hold it at arm's length anymore. The box was gone. Margaret's grocery list was gone. And for the first time since I had written it down in the composition notebook, I let myself understand what that meant. I set the renewal documents on the desk without looking at them, and I sat down on the floor, my back against the cabinet below the bookcase, because my legs made that decision before I did. The study was very quiet. The afternoon light came through the window, at the angle it came through in late October, falling across the desk in a long rectangle that moved almost imperceptibly as the sun tracked west. Margaret had chosen this room for my study because of that light. She had stood in the empty house on the day we got the keys before we had a single piece of furniture, and she had walked through every room and stood in each doorway for a moment, and when she reached this one, she had said, "This one is yours. Look at what the light does in here in the afternoon." I had worked in this room for 35 years. I had sat at that desk through every project, every deadline, every difficult calculation. I had sat at that desk after she died, and I had learned how to exist in the silence. And I had sat at that desk 10 days ago and written field notes about my son-in-law, taking $40,000 from my safe while I watched from the doorway. "Margaret," I said. Not loudly, not calling, just her name spoken into the quiet room, because there was no one else there, and I needed to hear a voice, and mine was the only one available. The words were inadequate in the specific way that words are always inadequate when you are trying to address something that language was not built to carry. I sat on the floor of my study for a long time, long enough for the rectangle of afternoon light to move all the way off the desk and onto the wall behind it, long enough for the room to shift into the particular gray gold of late afternoon. In California, the light that Margaret had said was the most honest light of the day because it showed you exactly what things looked like without flattering them. Then I stood up. I went to the kitchen and filled the kettle and set it on the burner and stood at the counter while it heated, looking out through Margaret's window at Margaret's tree, and I made the only decision available to me. I picked up my phone and called Robert. "He took the box," I said when he answered. A beat. "Margaret's box?" "Yes." Another beat shorter. "The life insurance documentation." "And her grocery list," I said. "There was a grocery list she wrote on a pharmacy receipt the year we got married. She put it in the box and forgot it was there, and I never took it out because I stopped. It does not matter why, it was in there." Robert was quiet for a moment in the way that Robert is sometimes quiet, not because he has nothing to say, but because he is deciding how much of what he is thinking should be said. "Thomas," he said at last, "we are done waiting. I want to walk into LAPD financial crimes first thing tomorrow morning with everything we have. All of it." The kettle began to whistle on the burner. "Yes," I said. "So do I." I drove to Silver Lake on Friday morning without calling first. This was deliberate. A phone call gives a person time to prepare, and I did not want Emily prepared. I wanted to see her face when she opened the door, before she had arranged it into whatever expression she had decided I should see. She opened the door in a paint-stained work shirt, which meant she had been in her studio space in the back bedroom. She was holding a pencil. When she saw me, the pencil stopped moving in her fingers, and something behind her eyes went very still, the way water goes still when something large moves beneath the surface. "Dad," she said, "I didn't know you were coming." "I know," I said. "Can I come in?" She stepped back and let me through. The apartment was the way Emily's spaces always were organized, in the specific way of a person who thinks visually, everything placed with intention, colors considered. Margaret's eye applied to a different life. I sat on the sofa, and Emily sat across from me in the chair by the window, her knees together, the pencil still in her hand. She had not offered me coffee. She always offered coffee. We talked around the edges of things for a few minutes, her work a project in Los Feliz. She was finishing, whether I had eaten breakfast. I let her talk. I watched her hands, which she was working very hard to keep still. Then I said, "Emily, I need to ask you about a document, a deed of trust that was recorded against my property 4 days ago. $280,000 secured against the house. My signature on the paperwork." I looked at her steadily. I did not sign it. The pencil in her fingers snapped. Not dramatically, just the small, clean break of a pencil under too much pressure. The way things break when the force applied to them finally exceeds what they were built to hold. "Dad," she started. "I am not asking you to explain what Daniel did," I said. "I am asking whether you knew this particular document existed." She looked at the 2 pieces of pencil in her hands for a moment, then she set them on the arm of the chair with the careful precision of someone managing a very small, very specific task, because the larger tasks are too large to look at directly. "He told me it was a refinancing," she said, "on our condo. He said there was some paperwork that needed a co-signer, and he asked me to sign something and I—" She stopped. Her throat moved. "I didn't read it carefully enough. I signed where he pointed." "Emily." I kept my voice level. "Did you know it was my house?" The silence lasted 4 seconds. "I knew it involved your property somehow," she said. "He said it was just a formality, that you had agreed to it." Her voice dropped to something just above a whisper. "I wanted to believe him, so I did." I nodded. This was more honesty than she had given me in months, and I was not going to interrupt it by reacting. Through the half-open door of the bedroom behind her, I saw something I was not meant to see. a phone charging on the nightstand, not Emily's phone, which was face up on the kitchen counter where she always kept it. This one was smaller, a prepaid model in a plain black case, the kind sold at gas stations and pharmacy chains for cash, the kind that does not require a contract or a name. Emily followed my eyes. She stood up quickly and pushed the bedroom door shut, but she was not quick enough, and we both knew it. She turned back to face me. Her chin was up and her jaw was set. And in that moment, she looked so precisely like her mother, facing something she could not fix, that my chest did something I did not have a name for. "You don't have to explain anything today," I said, and I meant it the way Margaret used to mean it, in the quiet, certain way she had, of closing a door on a conversation without making the other person feel shut out. "I'm not here to build a case against you." I stood. "I'm here because you are my daughter, and I wanted you to hear from me directly, before you hear it from anyone else, that things are about to change. Whatever happens next, I need you to know that." She did not say anything. Her eyes were bright, and her hands were clasped in front of her, and she was doing the controlled breathing of a person holding themselves together through an act of sustained will. I walked to the door. I put my hand on the frame, and I stopped. "Emily," I said, without turning around. "Whatever he told you about me, whatever version of me he gave you to justify what he was doing, that man does not exist." I walked to my car. I started the engine and pulled away from the curb, and at the first intersection, I glanced in the rearview mirror. Emily was standing at the window of her apartment looking down at the street. Her arms were crossed and her forehead was almost touching the glass. Her phone was not in her hand. Robert called at 7 on Monday morning. He never called before 8. In 15 years of Friday chess games and occasional professional consultations, Robert Hayes had never once contacted me before 8 in the morning, which told me, before I picked up, that whatever he had found over the weekend was not something that could wait for a reasonable hour. "Turn on KCRW, he said when I answered. "The business segment, then call me back." I turned on the radio on the kitchen counter, the same radio I had kept in the same spot since 1997, a habit Margaret had established because she liked to hear the news while she made coffee in the morning. The business segment was already midway through a report. Meridian Construction Group. The Los Angeles-based commercial construction firm had announced the previous Friday afternoon, after market close, which is when companies announce things they do not want, examined closely that its board of directors had authorized a comprehensive internal audit of all financial operations for the preceding 4 fiscal years. The announcement cited a commitment to transparency and operational excellence. The stock traded on a regional exchange had dropped 6.2% in pre-market trading. I turned the radio off and called Robert back. "How bad is it for him?" I asked. "Depends entirely on how much they find and how fast," Robert said. "An internal audit of this scope going back 4 years, if the auditors are competent, and boards of directors tend to hire competent auditors, when they are genuinely worried, they will find the subcontractor irregularities within the first 2 weeks. When they find those, they will find the LLC. When they find the LLC, they will find my name on it." He paused. "Yours. They will find your name on it. And Daniel knows this. Daniel has known this since the board made the decision, which I would estimate was 2 to 3 weeks ago, based on the typical timeline between a board resolution and a public announcement. He has had 2 to 3 weeks to prepare for the moment the auditors start pulling files." Another pause shorter. "Thomas, I want you to understand something clearly. Daniel did not break into your house because of anything you did. He did not start building a case against you because he knew you were investigating him. He did not know. He still does not know as far as I can tell. He is reacting to the audit," I said. "He is reacting entirely to the audit. You and I have been operating in parallel to whatever he is doing, but we have not intersected yet. He broke into your house because he needed to retrieve the documents he had stored there before auditors with subpoenas start asking about them. He filed the deed of trust against your property because he needed capital quickly, and he had already used your identity for other purposes, and one more transaction probably seemed manageable. He is building a case against you because he needs a credible alternative explanation for the money trail, and your name is already attached to it." Robert's voice was flat and precise, the way it always was when he was dismantling a financial structure, so I could see how it had been built. He is still operating on the assumption that he controls the timeline. The audit announcement rattled him. That much is obvious from everything he has done in the last 2 weeks. But he does not know the walls are already closing. He is building his exit in one direction, and we are coming from another. That is the window we have, and it will not stay open. I stood at the kitchen window with my coffee going cold in my hand, looking out at the yard. Two parallel tracks. Thomas Walker on one, Daniel Reed on the other, both moving toward the same point of intersection, without knowing the other was coming. In structural engineering, we call that a convergence load. Two independent forces arriving at the same point, simultaneously each one, calculated for the expected stress, neither one calculated for the combined weight of the other. Structures that seem solid fail under convergence loads. They fail because nobody anticipated them. "What is he doing with the money?" I asked. "The money he is moving." "I spent the weekend on that," Robert said. "I heard him set something down on a hard surface, his coffee cup, I guessed, on the desk in the small home office he kept in his house in Altadena. The attorney in Newport Beach, whose name surfaced when I traced the wire transfers moving through the Nevada LLC, is a specialist in what is sometimes called asset protection planning, which is a legal practice that sits on a spectrum between legitimate wealth management and outright concealment depending on intent and timing. This particular attorney has a history of representing clients who are, let us say, anticipating adverse legal proceedings. "He is hiding the money," I said. "He is moving it," Robert said. "There is a legal distinction, though. In this case, I suspect the intent erases it. What I was able to establish is that a limited liability company was formed in Nevada approximately 6 weeks ago. Nevada because Nevada has significantly more permissive corporate transparency requirements than California, meaning the ownership structure is harder to trace. The registered agent for the Nevada LLC is a management company that handles dozens of similar entities. The connection to Daniel is indirect and requires several steps to establish, but it is there. Fraudulent transfer, I said. California Civil Code, Section 3439. Robert confirmed. A transfer made with the intent to hinder delay or defraud a creditor, or, in this case, multiple creditors, including the company. He defrauded the bank that holds the fraudulent mortgage on your property and potentially the federal government. The timing is critical. The transfer has to have occurred with knowledge of impending legal liability to constitute fraudulent transfer. And the timing of the Nevada LLC formation 6 weeks ago suggests he knew the audit was coming before it was announced. I thought about the weekend Daniel had spent at my house in September, helping me clear brush from the back slope, eating dinner at my kitchen table, carrying on the comfortable conversation of a son-in-law who belonged there 6 weeks ago. He had been building his exit route while sitting at my table. "Robert," I said, "I want to go to LAPD tomorrow. Not Thursday, not the end of the week, tomorrow morning." I was going to suggest the same thing. He said, "I spoke to a contact at the FBI field office yesterday. Without getting into specifics, I indicated that we might have materials relevant to an ongoing financial investigation they may not be aware of yet. The contact indicated that timing matters in these situations." "Timing matters," I said. He used those exact words, "Yes." I rinsed my coffee cup at the sink and set it in the drying rack. Through the kitchen window, the scattered shadows from Margaret's tree had shifted with the moving sun, rearranging themselves into a new pattern that bore no resemblance to the one I had been watching 10 minutes before. That is the thing about convergence loads. Once you understand they are coming, you stop trying to manage the individual forces, and you start thinking about the point of impact. 8 o'clock tomorrow, I said. "I will pick you up." "Bring the full briefcase," Robert said. "Everything." "Everything," I said, and ended the call. I stood at the kitchen window for another minute, looking at the tree, thinking about Daniel Reed sitting at a desk in his 15th floor office in downtown Los Angeles, watching the pre-market numbers drop and calculating how much time he had left and what he still needed to do before the auditors pulled the right file from the right drawer. He did not know that the drawer had already been opened. He did not know about Robert. He did not know about Carol Norris. He did not know about the affidavit of forgery filed at the recorder's office or the emergency restraining order that had been granted on Thursday afternoon, restoring my property title pending full judicial review. He thought he was still the one building. He was not. I spent Monday evening at my desk, not working exactly, preparing. There is a difference that any engineer understands. Working is what you do when you are building something new, and preparing is what you do when you are about to walk into a situation where everything you have built will be tested against everything the other side has built, and the outcome will depend entirely on which structure is more sound. I had the briefcase open on the desk beside me. Robert and I had agreed on its contents during a phone call that afternoon, Every document in a specific order, each section tabbed and labeled the kind of organization that communicates to the person receiving it, that the person presenting it has not panicked, has not improvised, has thought clearly about what they are doing and why. A well-organized set of documents is its own argument. I had learned that in 40 years of presenting structural assessments to clients who did not always want to hear what the assessment said. The composition notebook was on the left side of the desk, open to the page I had started the night Daniel came to my house. 17 days of field notes. Every conversation, every document, every time stamp written in the order things happened, because that is the only order that matters when you are trying to show someone else the shape of a thing they did not see as it was being built. I poured 2 fingers of bourbon and sat in the armchair by the study window. I had earned a drink, and the alternative was sitting in a silent house thinking about the morning and thinking too far ahead of a problem is how engineers make mistakes. I sat in the armchair by the study window with the bourbon and looked out at the street. Waverly Drive at 9 in the evening in late October. Porch lights on a dog barking 2 houses down, the particular stillness of a residential neighborhood that has gone inside for the night. The liquid amber tree at the edge of my property had gone fully red in the last week. In the daylight, it was spectacular. In the dark, it was just a shape against the sky, its color invisible, all its drama hidden until the light came back. I thought about what Robert had said that morning, 2 parallel tracks converging, neither of us knowing exactly when the point of intersection would arrive. I thought about Daniel Reed at 15 years old, or 25, or 30, whenever it was that he had first understood that the rules everyone else seemed to follow did not have to apply to him if he was careful enough, if he was patient enough, if he built his structures quietly enough, that nobody looked at the foundation until he was already gone. I did not know when that understanding had come to him. I suspected it had come early, the way certain understandings do, not as a choice, but as a discovery. A door you find open that you did not know was there, and that you walk through before you fully consider where it leads. He had walked a long way through that door. I picked up the frame photograph from the corner of my desk, the one of Emily at her USC graduation, squinting into the sun with her mortarboard tilted sideways and her diploma in her hand. The photograph I kept on my desk, because it was the one where she looked most like herself, most fully and unguardedly happy in a way that adult life does not often permit. I looked at it for a long time. Then I set it face down on the desk, not because I was angry with her. I want to be precise about that. I set it down because I could not look at her face and also think clearly about what I needed to think clearly about, and clarity was what tomorrow required. There would be time for everything else after. There is always time for everything else after, if you get through the thing in front of you first. Across the city, 15 miles west and south in the Silver Lake apartment, I had sat in that morning, or perhaps in the office tower in downtown Los Angeles, where he had spent the last 6 years building something that only looked like a career Daniel Reed was doing something too. I did not know exactly what. I would not know until the following afternoon, when a detective from LAPD Financial Crimes would read me a list of accusations that would tell me, with the precision of a forensic document, exactly how well Daniel had studied my life. But I knew he was doing something. The audit announcement had been public for 3 days. A man who had spent 4 years constructing a fraud of this scope, who had thought clearly enough to use my identity as a structural element, who had been patient enough to build incrementally, and careful enough to store the most dangerous documents at a retired father-in-law's house in Pasadena. That man was not sitting still on the night before a forensic audit team started pulling files. He was building his exit, or he was building his defense. Or, and this was the possibility that had been sitting in the back of my mind since Robert had explained the Nevada LLC. That afternoon he was building both simultaneously the way a contractor hedges his bets by having 2 crews working in parallel on different phases of the same project. I finished the bourbon. I rinsed the glass at the kitchen sink and set it in the drying rack next to my coffee cup from the morning and the single plate from dinner, the particular accumulation of a day lived alone in a quiet house. I went back to the desk and I looked at the briefcase. 37 printed pages from the manila envelope. The USB drive Carol Norris had placed on the table in the Koreatown coffee shop. The property monitoring alert with its timestamp and recorded deed information. The affidavit of forgery, file stamped by the recorder's office. The court order granting the emergency restraining order, issued Thursday afternoon, bearing the signature of a Los Angeles Superior Court judge who had apparently found the grounds exceptionally clear. 17 days of work, 11 contracts under my name that I had never signed, $342,000 that had moved through an account bearing my name without my knowledge, a house that someone had tried to mortgage out from under me, while I was sitting in a coffee shop, finding out about everything else they had taken. I closed the briefcase and latched it and set it on the floor beside the desk, where I would see it when I came downstairs in the morning. Then I did something I had not done since the first night I spent alone in this house after Margaret died. I went to the kitchen, turned off every light, and sat at the table in the dark for a while. Not brooding, not afraid, just sitting in the house I had built, feeling the particular weight of it around me, the walls and the floors and the roof that I had designed to hold and that had held through everything. Somewhere across Los Angeles, in whatever room he was sitting in, Daniel Reed was putting the finishing touches on a document that would reach the LAPD the following morning. He had gone through my professional history with the thoroughness of a man who had been planning this for months, mining the emails I had sent my daughter, over a decade of Sunday afternoon phone calls, project names, contract figures, the names of county officials. I had worked alongside the specific technical vocabulary of a 40-year career in structural engineering. He had taken the truth of my working life and arranged it into the shape of a crime I had never committed. And he had done it carefully, the way he did everything with the patience of a man who believed that preparation was the same thing as certainty. He was wrong about that. Preparation is not certainty. I had learned that in 40 years of engineering. You can prepare for every load you anticipate and still fail to account for the one you did not see coming. The structures that stand are not the ones that were built to withstand every possible force. They are the ones built on foundations honest enough to flex without breaking when something unexpected arrives. I went upstairs at 10:30. I brushed my teeth and set my alarm for 5:45 and lay down on my side of the bed in the dark house, and I closed my eyes. I was asleep before 11, the sleep of a man who has done what he can do with the time he has been given, and is prepared to find out in the morning whether it was enough. Tuesday morning, I drove to LAPD Financial Crimes on West 1st Street, with the briefcase on the passenger seat and Robert following in his own car. We were told at the front desk that Detective Rourke was not available and that we could leave our contact information and expect a call within 2 to 3 business days. Robert and I sat in the parking structure for 10 minutes afterward and agreed that this was not the setback it appeared to be, that walking in cold without an appointment was always a long shot, that the materials we had were not going anywhere, and that we would try again, Thursday if we had not heard by Wednesday afternoon. Wednesday afternoon, at 2:17, my phone rang. I was in the study reviewing a section of the composition notebook when I saw the number A213 area code I did not recognize, a downtown Los Angeles prefix. I picked up on the second ring. "Mr. Walker, this is Detective James Rourke, LAPD Financial Crimes Unit. I wonder if you'd be willing to come in for a conversation." His voice was even and professionally neutral, the voice of a man who has learned to drain inflection from his words, so that the person on the other end cannot read anything into them before the conversation has started. "What is this regarding?" I asked, though something in my chest had already begun, the particular tightening that comes when a structure you have been monitoring announces itself. "We've received a complaint that names you," Rourke said. "I'd rather discuss the specifics in person. Would tomorrow morning work? 9 o'clock. "What kind of complaint?" I said. "I'd like to know what I'm walking into." A brief pause. "Allegations of bribery of a public official and fraudulent billing practices on public infrastructure contracts, specifically several projects in the Pasadena and Arcadia areas between 2015 and 2019. I sat down. Not because my legs gave out. I sat down deliberately, the way you lower yourself onto uncertain footing when you need to think and cannot afford to fall. I pulled the composition notebook toward me and uncapped my pen. "Can you give me a project name?" I said. He gave me 3. I wrote them down as he spoke. The Huntington Drive Bridge Rehabilitation, the Colorado Boulevard Storm Drain Expansion, the Santa Anita Avenue Underpass Structural Retrofit. I knew all 3. I had been the consulting engineer of record on all 3. I had spent a combined 4 years of my professional life on those projects, and I knew the names of every inspector, every county official, every subcontractor foreman I had ever spoken to on those job sites, because I had written their names in notebooks, exactly like the one in front of me every day I had worked. And Daniel Reed, who had eaten dinner at my table and asked questions about my work with the comfortable curiosity of a son-in-law who was interested in his father-in-law's career, had been writing them down too, not in a notebook. In the emails I had sent Emily over a decade of Sunday afternoon conversations, the ones still sitting on the shared computer in their Silver Lake apartment, the ones I had written because Emily had always asked good questions and I had always liked answering them. I looked up at the bookshelf across the room. Emily's graduation photograph was still face down on the corner of the desk, where I had placed it the night before. I had known in some part of myself that does not announce its conclusions that I would need to put it there. I had not known exactly why until this moment. "Mr. Walker," Rourke said, "does 9 o'clock work for you?" "Yes," I said. "9 o'clock works. I will be there." I paused. "Detective Rourke, I am going to bring some materials with me. Quite a few materials, as it happens. I hope you will have time to look at them." Another pause slightly longer than the first. "What kind of materials?" "The kind," I said, "that explain a great deal about why someone might want to file a complaint like this one." I ended the call and sat at my desk for a moment with my hand still on the phone. Then I called Robert. "They called," I said when he picked up. "I know," he said. "I have been waiting for you to call me since 2 o'clock. How bad is the complaint?" "Bribery and fraud on 3 projects I actually worked," I said. He used the real names, Robert, the real project numbers, the real officials. Robert was quiet for 4 seconds. "He read your emails," he said. "Yes," I said. "He read my emails." "Thomas!" Robert's voice shifted into the register he uses when he wants to make sure I hear what he's saying, and not what I might be afraid he's saying. "This changes nothing about tomorrow. Do you understand me? This changes nothing." I looked at the face-down photograph on my desk. Emily at 22, diploma in hand, the most unguardedly happy I had ever seen her. "I know," I said. 9 o'clock. I will pick you up at 8. Before I walk you into that room, before I show you exactly what I put on that detective's table and what happened next, I want to know you are still in this with me. Comment the word foundation below. Just that one word. It tells me you have been here from the beginning, and I read every single one. One more thing. What follows contains some fictional elements added for storytelling purposes. It may not reflect every detail of life as it happened. If you would rather not continue, you can step away right here. For those staying, this is the part that changes everything. Robert was waiting on his front porch in Altadena when I pulled up at 8 o'clock Thursday morning, which meant he had been ready for some time before that. He was wearing his good jacket, the charcoal wool one, he reserved for occasions that required a certain kind of seriousness, and he had his own leather bag over his shoulder, thinner than mine, but heavier than it looked. He got in the passenger seat and we drove down Lake Avenue toward the freeway without speaking for the first few minutes, which was not unusual for us. Some mornings at the chess table we played 3 or 4 moves before either of us said anything, because we had known each other long enough to understand that silence is not the absence of communication. It is a form of it. "Did you sleep?" Robert asked as I merged onto the 110 South. "Some," I said. "Good enough," he said, which was both a question and an answer, and we left it there. On the freeway, I asked him whether I should have called an attorney. It was a question I had been turning over since 2 in the morning, lying in the dark, listening to the house settle around me. Robert considered it with the seriousness it deserved. A man who brings a lawyer to a voluntary interview when he says he has nothing to hide has already told the detective something, he said. He has told him that he is thinking about what he might need to be protected from. Innocent people do not generally think about that before they walk in the door. He looked straight ahead at the freeway. "You are not going in to defend yourself, Thomas. You are going in to present evidence. Those are different postures and they require different preparations." "No lawyer," I said. "No lawyer," he agreed. We parked in the structure on the east side of the building on West 1st Street at 8:40 and walked in at 8:55, which gave us 5 minutes in the lobby, enough time to confirm that we were composed, that the briefcase was in order, that we were exactly who we intended to be when that door opened. Detective James Rourke was a heavy-set man in his early 50s with close-cropped gray hair and the particular posture of someone who has spent decades sitting across tables from people who were not telling him the truth, and had learned to hold himself in a way that took up space without being aggressive about it. He shook my hand with a grip that measured without announcing itself, looked at Robert briefly and then back at me, and led us down a corridor to a room with a table, 4 chairs, a window that looked out onto a parking structure, and nothing on the walls. He sat across from us and opened a folder, and set his pen on the table beside it, and looked at me with the expression of a man who has done this many times and is genuinely uncertain at this moment which version of the person across from him he is looking at. "Mr. Walker," he said, "I want to be straightforward with you. We received a complaint 2 days ago that makes some serious allegations about your conduct during your career as a structural engineer. I am going to ask you some questions, and I want you to understand that you are not under arrest, and you are free to leave at any time. You are also free to have an attorney present if you would like one." "I don't need an attorney," I said, "and I didn't come here to answer questions, detective. I came here to show you something." Rourke's expression did not change, but something behind it shifted slightly, the adjustment of a man recalibrating his expectations for a conversation he thought he understood. I set the briefcase on the table and opened it. I did not rush. I had learned decades ago that the speed at which you present information tells the person receiving it something about how confident you are in that information. A man who slaps documents on a table is a man who wants the volume of the material to substitute for its quality. A man who places each item deliberately in order with space between them is a man who knows that every item will hold up under examination and is not concerned about whether the examination takes 5 minutes or 5 hours. I placed the LLC registration record first. Thomas Walker, Construction Consulting LLC, registered 14 months ago, address on Waverly Drive in Pasadena. Signature that was not mine. I explained in one sentence what it was and why it was relevant. I placed the 11 contracts, second each one executed under my name, each one billing Meridian Construction Group for structural consulting services I had never performed. I noted the total $342,000. I placed the 3 Ghost Company invoices, Third Pacific Edge Site Services, Western Slope Grading and Excavation, Cal South Foundation. Specialist with Robert's analysis of their non-existence in the California Secretary of State database, paper clipped to the front. I placed the property radar alert and the deed of trust documents. Fourth, the fraudulent mortgage of $280,000 filed against my property. The forged notarization, the affidavit of forgery I had filed at the recorder's office, and the emergency court order that had restored my title. I placed the composition notebook last, open to the first entry from the night of the break-in. 17 days of field notes written in the order. Things happened in the handwriting of a man who had spent 40 years documenting what he observed. Rourke looked at the table. He looked at it the way I look at a structural drawing that is more complex than I initially expected, with the specific focus of a person deciding where to begin. "Mr. Hayes," he said, without looking up. "What is your background?" 31 years as a forensic accountant with the FBI's Los Angeles field office, Robert said. "I retired 5 years ago." Rourke picked up the LLC registration document and read it. He set it down and picked up the first contract. He read that too. He worked through the pile methodically, which told me he was the kind of detective who actually read things rather than performing the act of reading them, and I found that reassuring in the way that I find competence reassuring in any field. After 12 minutes, he set the last document down and looked at me directly. "The complaint we received," he said, "names a witness, a man who claims to have directly observed certain transactions you allegedly made." He pulled a page from his own folder and placed it on the table, a printed photograph, a man in his late 30s with dark hair and a narrow face. "Do you know this person?" I leaned forward and looked at the photograph. "No," I said. "I have never seen this man in my life. His name in the complaint is listed as Gary Hoffman, address in Glendale." Rourke looked at Robert. "We ran the name this morning. No California driver's license, no social security records, no utility accounts, no rental history." He paused. "The photograph, however, is real. It belongs to a man named Marcus Webb, formerly employed at Meridian Construction Group, currently residing in Portland, Oregon. We reached him by phone this morning." The room was very quiet for a moment. "What did he say?" I asked. "He said that approximately 3 months ago, he received a call from a man he identified as Daniel Reed, his former supervisor at Meridian." Rourke said, his voice carrying the flat precision of a man reading from a report he has already memorized. Mr. Reed offered him $15,000 to, and I am quoting Mr. Webb's exact words, confirm some information if anyone official asked. Mr. Webb declined and did not hear from Mr. Reed again. Rourke looked at me steadily. Until this morning, when we called him, he said he had not thought about the conversation again. He said he assumed Mr. Reed had found someone else. I looked at the photograph of Marcus Webb on the table between us, a man in Portland, Oregon, who had no idea his face had been attached to a name that did not exist, filed in a police complaint against a man he had never met. Detective Rourke, I said, there is one more item. I reached into the side pocket of the briefcase and placed Carol Norris's USB drive on the table. This contains 17 recorded conversations between the man who filed the complaint against me and a Meridian Construction Group employee who participated in those conversations and consented to the recordings. The recordings were made by a participant in each conversation with the advice of retained counsel for the purpose of documenting an ongoing federal wire fraud scheme. My colleague can provide the full legal citation, the chain of custody documentation, and the attorney's written opinion confirming admissibility under federal evidentiary standards. I looked at Rourke. I would suggest you find a way to listen to file number 12 before you do anything else. Rourke picked up the drive and held it for a moment, turning it once in his fingers the way Robert had turned it in the Koreatown coffee shop. Then he stood up, put on his jacket, and said, "Mr. Walker, I need you to wait here for a few minutes while I get someone from our digital forensics unit." He went to the door and stopped with his hand on the frame, his back to us, and then he turned around. "Mr. Walker," he said, "how long have you been putting this together?" 17 days, I said, "but I have been watching for longer than that." He nodded once. He went out and closed the door behind him. Robert reached into his bag and produced 2 paper cups of coffee from the cart outside the building, which he had acquired while I was parking the car, and which he had said nothing about until this moment. He handed me one. 17 days, he said. 17 days, I said. We drank our coffee and waited. We waited in the hallway for an hour and 20 minutes. The hallway outside the LAPD Financial Crimes Unit on a Thursday morning had the particular quality of institutional waiting rooms. Everywhere, fluorescent light that flattened everything it touched. Plastic chairs bolted to the wall in a row. A water fountain at the far end that someone had taped an out-of-order sign to at some point, and nobody had removed. Robert read the newspaper he had brought, folded in his jacket pocket. I sat with my hands on my knees and watched the hallway and thought about nothing, which is a skill I developed on difficult job sites when the only useful thing was to stay still and wait for conditions to change. At 10:47, Carol Norris arrived with her attorney, a brisk woman in her 40s, carrying a litigation bag, who introduced herself to the officer at the desk and was led through the door without looking at us. Carol followed. She glanced at me once as she passed a quick and direct look that carried something in it I recognized, not relief exactly, but the particular expression of a person who has been carrying something alone for a long time and has finally set it down in a place where other hands can hold it. Yeah, I nodded. She went through the door. Robert folded his newspaper. "File 12, he said quietly. "File 12, I said. 40 minutes passed. The out-of-order water fountain dripped once and then stopped. A uniformed officer walked the length of the hallway twice without looking at us. Somewhere behind the closed door, a woman who had spent 8 months recording her own supervisor was sitting across from a detective and a digital forensics analyst and a court reporter. And the voice of a man who had eaten at my kitchen table and called me by my first name was playing through a speaker in that room, saying things in the careful, casual tone of a man who had never once imagined that the words were being preserved. The door opened at 11:31. Rourke came out first. He looked at me with an expression I had not seen on his face before. Not the carefully neutral assessment of our first hour together, but something quieter and more direct. The expression of a man who has just seen a structure from the inside and understands now why it was built the way it was. "Mr. Walker," he said, "can you come in for a few minutes?" I followed him into the room. Carol Norris was still seated at the table, her attorney beside her. The digital forensics analyst was closing a laptop. A court reporter was capping her machine. Carol looked up when I entered. Her eyes were dry, but her face had the particular quality of a person who had recently stopped performing composure and had not yet decided what came next. She was 51 years old, and she had spent 8 months walking into an office every morning, knowing what she knew and saying nothing, and the weight of that was visible on her in a way that it had not been in the Koreatown coffee shop. "Ms. Norris," I said. "Thank you." She pressed her lips together and nodded once quickly, the nod of a person accepting something they are not yet sure they deserve. Rourke gestured me to a chair. He remained standing, which I had noticed was his preference when he was thinking rather than performing the act of an interview. "Mr. Walker," he said, "I want to tell you what File 12 contains because you have a right to know what has just been placed in this investigation." He looked at his notes. In the recording, Daniel Reed instructs Ms. Norris that, in the event of questions from the board's audit committee regarding the structural consulting line items in Meridian's accounts payable, she should state that the documentation was submitted directly by Thomas Walker's office and that she processed it in good faith on that basis. He looked up. He says, and I am quoting directly, "If anyone asks, tell them Thomas Walker structured it this way. He does it with all his consulting arrangements. It's just how he works." The room was quiet. I thought about the 40 years those words were supposed to describe. 40 years of signed drawings and stamped reports and phone calls returned the same day in invoices that said exactly what they said, no more and no less. 40 years of a name that meant something because I had been careful about what I attached it to. "Detective Rourke," I said. "What happens now?" Rourke put his notebook in his jacket pocket. "We will be contacting the FBI's Los Angeles field office this afternoon. Given the wire fraud component, they have concurrent jurisdiction, and they will want to be involved from this point forward." He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. "And we will be paying a visit to the offices of Meridian Construction Group." He looked at me steadily for a moment. "Mr. Walker," he said, "I owe you an apology for the posture I came into this morning with." "You came in with the posture the complaint required," I said. "I would have done the same." He almost smiled. It did not quite arrive, but it was close. I walked back out into the hallway. Robert was standing, which meant he had seen something in my face through the small window in the door that told him sitting was no longer appropriate. "Well," he said. I looked down the hallway, the fluorescent light, the bolted chairs, the out-of-order water fountain at the far end. "It's done, Robert," I said. "They just don't know it yet." Saturday night, 11 o'clock. I was in the study with the lights low, and Margaret's wooden box open on the desk in front of me. The police had returned it that afternoon, along with a brief written confirmation that the item had been recovered during the execution of a search warrant at a Silver Lake residence. The life insurance documents were intact. Underneath them, still folded on its pharmacy receipt, was the grocery list in Margaret's handwriting. I had not touched it. I had just looked at it for a while, the way you look at something that has come back to you from a place you were not sure it would come back from. My phone rang. The screen said, "Emily." I picked up. "Dad?" Her voice broke on the single syllable, just the one, and then she pulled it back together. "Are you okay?" "I'm okay," I said. "Are you—" She made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sob. Something in between the sound of a person who has been holding themselves together for too many hours and has finally reached someone safe enough to stop. "They came to the office," she said. "2 detectives. Daniel was—" She stopped. "He was in a meeting. They waited for him in the lobby, and then they walked him out, in front of everyone." I did not say anything. I let her talk. "I didn't know," she said. "I want you to know that. About your name on the company, about the house. I didn't know those things." Her voice was steadier now, the way voices get when they have moved through the worst of it. "But I knew something was wrong. I've known for over a year, and I kept deciding not to know. Does that make sense?" "It makes a great deal of sense," I said. "It does not make it right, but it makes sense." She was quiet for a moment. Outside my study window, the white tree Margaret had planted was a pale shape in the dark yard, barely visible holding its ground. "The prepaid phone," Emily said. "The one you saw in the bedroom. He was using it to talk to a lawyer in Newport Beach about moving money. I heard part of a call once, maybe 3 months ago. I told myself it was something legal, something for the business." Her voice dropped. "I was so good at telling myself things." "Emily," I said. "I know," she said. "I know." Something in my chest did a thing I had not planned for. Not tears. I did not cry on that phone call, though I am not certain why. Something quieter than tears. A loosening of something that had been braced for a long time. "You didn't call him," I said. "After I came to see you. You didn't warn him." She was quiet for 3 seconds. "No," she said. "I didn't." "That matters." I said. Does it? Her voice was very small. It does. It will. Another silence longer. Then, Dad, can I ask you something? She did not wait for me to say yes. Did you ever think it might be me? The complaint, the information. Did you think I gave it to him on purpose? I looked at the face-down photograph on the corner of the desk. The USC graduation, the tilted mortar board, the unguarded happiness of a 22-year-old who had not yet learned what it costs to look away from a thing you should be looking at. I picked it up and turned it face up. No, I said. I thought he read your emails, the ones you and I wrote back and forth when you were in school. You asked good questions and I answered them, and he was patient enough to wait until he needed them. She made the sound again, that not quite laugh, not quite sob. I did ask a lot of questions, she said. You always did, I said. That was your mother in you. The silence after that was a different kind. Not the silence of things unsaid, but the silence of things finally said, settling into the space between us, like concrete curing, slowly finding its strength. I'm sorry, Dad, she said at last. I'm so sorry. I know you are, I said. Get some sleep, Em. We'll talk more when you're ready. After she hung up, I sat for a while with the phone in my hand and the wooden box open on the desk, and the photograph of Emily face up in the lamplight, and I thought about what Margaret would have said. She would have said, Thomas, that girl, has your stubbornness and my instincts, and between the two of them, she will be all right. I believed that. I had believed it her whole life. I believed it now. Rourke called at 9 on Monday morning. Mr. Walker, he said, Daniel Reed was formally arrested and booked Friday evening. 7 counts. I wanted you to hear it from me directly rather than from a news alert. I was standing at the kitchen counter with my coffee. I set the cup down and pulled out the chair at the kitchen table. Margaret's chair, the one I never sat in, and I sat in it. Not because my legs gave out, because it seemed right somehow to sit in a different place for a different kind of news. Thank you, I said. What are the counts? Rourke went through them. Wire fraud under federal statute, 18 counts corresponding to the 18 wire transfers that had moved money from Meridian accounts into the Ghost Company accounts, and from there into Daniel's personal holdings. Grand theft for the $40,000 taken from my safe and the contents of Margaret's box. Elder financial abuse under California law, which carried enhanced penalties because the victim, I was over 65. Identity theft for the LLC formed in my name. Deed fraud for the forged mortgage. Fraudulent transfer for the Nevada LLC and the asset movement through the Newport Beach attorney. And filing a false police report, the complaint he had filed against me with the specificity of a man who had studied my professional history, with the patience of a student preparing for an examination he intended to pass. His attorney has already made contact about a plea, Rourke said. I can't discuss specifics, but I can tell you the exposure on the federal counts alone is substantial. He is not in a position to go to trial. Will he? I asked. My experience says no, Rourke said. Men like this calculate risk very well up until the moment they don't. Once the calculation stops working in their favor, they adapt. A pause. There is something else I want to tell you, something we found in the course of the full investigation that I think you should know about. Tell me. Rourke was quiet for a moment in the way of a man choosing which door to open. In going through Daniel Reed's personal files and communications, we found documentation of 3 separate occasions over the past 14 months in which he attempted to have you sign a partnership agreement. The agreement had you signed, it would have made you a co-owner of Thomas Walker Construction Consulting LLC, a legal partner in the entity he was using to run the fraudulent billing scheme. As a co-owner of record, you would have been directly liable for the financial activity conducted under the LLC. The kitchen was very quiet around me. He tried to make me a co-conspirator, I said. That is the accurate legal description. Yes, Rourke said. Conspiracy to commit fraud under federal statute. If you had signed, you would have been looking at the same exposure he is looking at now, with the additional complication of having your signature on the formation documents. I thought about 3 evenings in the past 14 months when Daniel had arrived at my house with paperwork. The first time he had described it as a consulting arrangement, he wanted to formalize a way to properly compensate me for advice I had given him over the years. I had told him I did not want compensation for conversations over dinner. The second time he had called it an administrative formality, something his company's legal department had requested for tax purposes. I had told him I was retired and intended to stay that way. The third time 3 months ago, he had said Emily had already agreed to it in principle, and that it would help them both financially. I had told him that Emily's agreement to something was not the same as my agreement to it, and that I did not sign documents I had not read, and that I would need a week to review any paperwork before I put my name on it. He had taken the papers back and said that was fine, and we had eaten dinner and talked about the Dodgers, and I had forgotten about it by the following morning. "Mr. Walker," Rourke said, "are you there?" "I'm here," I said. "I'm thinking about something my father told me when I was 12 years old. He was teaching me to use a handsaw, and he said, measure twice, cut once. Never put the blade to the wood until you know exactly where you're cutting and why." I looked out the kitchen window at Margaret's tree. I have been following that rule for 53 years. I did not know on any of those 3 evenings that I was following it about something other than wood. Rourke was quiet for a moment. "That rule," he said carefully, "is probably the reason you are on this side of the phone call rather than the other." After I ended the call, I sat at Margaret's kitchen table for a while longer, in her chair in the morning light that came through the window she had chosen. Then I called Robert. "Rourke called," I said when he answered. "7 counts and something else." I told him about the 3 evenings and the partnership agreement and what it would have meant if I had signed. Robert listened without interrupting, which was not unusual. What was unusual was the silence after I finished longer than his normal processing silence, longer than the 4-second pause he used when something was serious. "Thomas," he said at last. "I know," I said. "You turned him down 3 times. I turned him down 3 times because I do not sign things I have not read. It has nothing to do with wisdom. It is just how I was trained." "Sometimes," Robert said, "being trained correctly is the same thing as being wise. The outcome is identical." We agreed to meet at the library that Friday. Not for anything in particular, just for the chess game we had not played in 3 weeks at the table, in the northwest corner near the periodicals, the way we had been meeting for 15 years. I drove to Altadena that afternoon, and we sat on the bench outside the library in the thin November sun, which was warm enough to sit in if you were wearing a jacket, and Robert had brought 2 cups of coffee from the cart on the corner, and we drank them and looked out at the street. Robert said something under his breath that I did not catch, then stopped and looked at me sideways. "I've been spending too much time with you," he said. "What I meant to say was, you are not allowed to lose on Friday." "I have never lost to you on Friday," I said. "I know," he said. "I just wanted to hear you say it." The November light lay flat and gold across the street, the particular light of late autumn in the San Gabriel Valley that makes everything look briefly like a painting of itself before the sun moves on. I drank my coffee, Robert drank his. A woman walked past with a stroller, the baby inside, asleep with one arm flung out to the side, the way sleeping babies do, entirely confident that the world will hold them. "Robert," I said. "Yes." "Thank you." He looked straight ahead. "Don't mention it," he said. "I mean that literally. Do not mention it. I have a reputation." I did not laugh, but it was close. The weeks after a storm have their own particular quality, not peaceful exactly, more like the specific silence of a house after the power comes back on everything. The same as before, but you are aware of it differently. Now aware that it can go out, again aware that you had been taking it for granted in a way you will not take it for granted anymore. Daniel accepted a plea agreement in the 3rd week of November. 6 years in federal prison, full restitution of all funds, permanent bar from working in any financial or fiduciary capacity. His attorney released a statement describing his client's remorse. I did not read it. Remorse is between a man and whatever he believes in. It is not for me to evaluate. Carol Norris received a formal declination of prosecution from the federal attorney's office, which is the legal way of saying they were not going to charge her. She kept her position at Meridian through the restructuring, which the board handled with the thoroughness of a company that understood it needed to demonstrate that it took these things seriously. She sent me a card in December, a plain card, no printed message inside, just her name signed at the bottom, and 2 words above it, "Thank you." I put it on the shelf in the study next to Margaret's wooden box. The civil action on the deed fraud was resolved quickly once the criminal proceedings were underway. The private lender, presented with evidence that the mortgage had been obtained through forgery and fraud, withdrew their claim without litigation. My title was restored cleanly with no encumbrances. The house on Waverly Drive was mine again, the way it had always been, mine earned, maintained, held. Emily filed for divorce in December. She cooperated fully with the federal investigation and was not charged. She took a leave from her studio and stayed in the guest room down the hall for 3 weeks, while she worked through what needed to be worked through, which included several long evenings at the kitchen table with cups of tea going cold, and conversations that went places I had not expected conversations to go, and that I think were necessary for both of us in ways I am still understanding. She found an apartment in Los Feliz in January. On the day she moved, she stood in the front doorway of my house with her last box under her arm, and she reached into her jacket pocket and held out a key. "You gave me this when I left for college," she said. "I've had it for 19 years. "Keep it," I said. She looked at me. "Keep it," I said again. "That is what it is for." She put the key back in her pocket. She hugged me once briefly and hard, the way she had hugged me as a child, all her weight into it, no hesitation. Then she picked up her box and carried it to the moving truck and did not look back, which I recognized as a thing she had learned from me, this particular way of committing to the direction you have chosen. I stood on the porch and watched the truck go. The November liquid amber at the edge of the yard had gone bare by now, just the branch structure showing the architecture of the tree revealed when all the color had fallen away. It was still standing. That was the thing about trees. The winter shows you what they are actually made of. I went inside and made coffee and called Robert to confirm Friday. There is a particular quality to late afternoon light in the San Gabriel Valley in November. It comes in low and gold through the west-facing windows, and it does not flatter things the way morning light does. It shows them as they are without softening the edges, without making the ordinary look more significant than it is. Margaret used to call it the honest light. She said you could tell a great deal about a room by what it looked like at 4 in the afternoon in November, because that was when the room stopped performing and simply existed. I am sitting at my desk in that light. The blueprints from 1989 are spread in front of me, the original drawings for this house drafted by hand on vellum paper that has softened at the folds over 35 years. I have looked at these drawings many times in the last several weeks, not to check anything, just to look at them. There is something in returning to the original document, the thing you made before anyone had an opinion about it, that I find clarifying in a way I cannot entirely articulate. Margaret's wooden box is on the shelf to my left where I moved it after the police returned it. The grocery list is still inside. I have decided to leave it there. I trace the foundation section with one finger. This is the part nobody sees once the house is built, buried under concrete and backfill, and decades of ordinary life conducted above it. When I drew these lines in 1989, I spent more time on this section than on any other. The roof is what people look at. The kitchen is what people live in. But the foundation is what everything else rests on, and if you get it wrong, the rest does not matter how beautiful it is. I got it right. 35 years and not a crack, not a settlement, not a single door that has gone out of square. I think about what it would mean to build a life the way you build a foundation. Not the visible parts, the career, the reputation, the things that other people can point to and evaluate. The invisible parts, the choices you make when nobody is watching about what you will and will not put your name on. The habits you build so deep and so early that they operate without your conscious direction. The way a foundation operates without your conscious direction. Just doing what it was built to do, long after you have stopped thinking about it. 3 times in 14 months, a man handed me a document and asked me to sign it. 3 times I said no, not because I suspected what the document was, but because I do not sign things I have not read. A habit formed so long ago, I cannot remember forming it. A rule my father gave me about wood and saws when I was 12 years old, which I had been applying without knowing it to everything that mattered. Sometimes the foundation saves the building, and the building never knows. From the kitchen, Emily's voice, "Dad, are you eating dinner with me or not?" She drove out from Los Feliz this afternoon. She does that now on Sundays sometimes, or on days that are not Sundays, but that she seems to decide need the same quality of attention. She brings groceries she has selected with Margaret's specificity, the particular brand of ginger tea, the bread from the bakery on Colorado Boulevard, things that tell me she has been paying attention to what home means, even when she was choosing not to look at it. "Coming," I call back. I fold the blueprints along their original creases. I set them in the drawer where they live. I look at the shelf, the wooden box, the framed survey map of the property, Carol Norris's thank you card, the photograph of Emily at 22, tilted mortarboard, unguarded happiness, face up in the lamplight, the way it should be. I stand at the window for a moment before I turn off the desk lamp. Outside, Margaret's white flowering tree is holding its last blossoms of the season, a few pale flowers in the November light, persistent, unremarkable, exactly where she planted them. She was right about that tree. She was right about most things she chose carefully. I turn off the lamp. I go to have dinner with my daughter. The foundation holds. People ask me what this whole thing taught me. Here's the truth. Family betrayal does not always arrive with warning. Sometimes it sits at your dinner table, calls you by your first name, and waits patiently for the moment you are not looking. I was not looking. I trusted too completely, too quietly, for too long. Do not be like me. Check the foundation before the walls start cracking. Ask the questions you have been avoiding. Look at the documents before you sign them. I also believe, and I do not say this lightly, that God places protection around us in the moments we cannot protect ourselves. I did not know those 3 refusals were saving my life, but they were. This family story reminded me of something I had forgotten. The most important things you build are invisible. Your name, your word. The quiet habits nobody sees until the moment they are the only thing holding. If this family betrayal found you at the right moment, if some part of it reminded you of your own table, your own house, your own unanswered questions, leave a comment below. Share it with someone who needs it. Subscribe so you never miss a story that matters. Thank you for staying until the end. Some stories ahead contain fictional elements built for reflection and education. If that is not for you, no hard feelings, step away and find what fits. For everyone else, I will see you in the next one.